the show. Today, I want to talk about a topic that's actually becoming a rather hot topic. And I find it interesting because it's something that really hasn't been discussed up until just recently. And so I want to talk a little bit about the mighty M word. What do I mean by that? The M word. Oh, good old menopause. And I have to say, it has really come up and kind of kicked me in the ass out of nowhere. And what's really interesting is I think, like a lot of people, I had a lot of misperceptions and misconceptions around what menopause was, how it affected women, and truthfully, how it affects everyone. Because whether you're in relationships, whether you're working with individuals, whether you have clients, you have teams, whatever it might be, everyone is affected by what shows up when the mighty M word kicks in. And so what's interesting is I had probably gone through my first batch and just saying, so some of you men that tune in, you may want to stay listening. I know this is a topic that is oftentimes uncomfortable, even for women, and we don't talk about it. And I know right now there are more and more conversations going on. I even have friends in this space that really, this is their life's work, right? And so I invite you to stay in this conversation today because I want to talk about some things that maybe we're not discussing. And I want to share a little bit about my journey over the last several years. I actually first started having symptoms way back when I was around 38 years old. I was actually going through quite a bit of challenging things in my life at that time. One, I had hit rock bottom multiple times in my corporate career. So my stress levels, my cortisol, my adrenals were completely fried. All of those levels were through the roof. It wasn't something that I can say I was really proud of how I was showing up in that space in my life. And it was when I really hit rock bottom in my corporate career. And ended up in the hospital. And I know I've talked about that on some other podcasts, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more specifically then. But I really want to stay on the subject of menopause and my hormones for just a moment. Because at that time, my hormones were all over the place. And so I had made the decision, I had been on birth control for about 20 years. And I made the decision to get off birth control because I could tell something wasn't right with my body. And at the time, I started working with my regular doctor, and then I was also working with a naturopath. And it was the first time I really started working deeply and more focused with a naturopath. And I wanted to look at some more holistic ways to re-regulate or get my body back in alignment. Everything was feeling off. I was extremely emotional. I was very fatigued. I had a lot of things going on. And so I had a battery test run after I'd hit rock bottom. There were still some things that didn't seem right in my system. And so I had made the decision that it was time to get off birth control. I wanted to give my body a rest. I wasn't in any need for birth control at that time. And so it was really interesting because my body went into a complete and utter, like, shutdown mode. It went into, when I got off of birth control, my body didn't know what to do with itself. And one of the reasons I'm talking about that is because I think that's a conversation that actually we need to start talking about more, is the effects of that hormone injection, that disruption of our natural rhythms and our cycles, and what that looks like, especially for young girls that might be getting on birth control at the age of 15, 16, 18, in their 20s. For me, it was in my early 20s. Actually, no, I guess it was about 18, 19 when I got on, because it was about 20 years that I was on when I finally decided to get off. Needless to say, there are more and more studies, there are more and more research that shows the effects to our hormones, to our nervous system, to our cortisol, our insulin resistance. There's a whole battery of things that go on that I don't think we're talking about enough. And so I really want to put that out there first and foremost. I think the first thing we need to do is educate ourselves more on what those things are doing to the human body, especially women's bodies, and their development and their hormones and their cycles, and how it's disrupting our natural rhythms. And when we choose to get off, several women, and I've had many conversations about this since, several women have talked about how their bodies have completely shut down and gone into a tailspin. And mine, it was like the start of the ultimate shit show in my body. No joke. I couldn't get anything to work in my system right. And so again, I had my doctor and I had my naturopath. and they were sort of competing with each other. Not that they knew each other, but they're like what they were telling me was competing each other and fighting each other, which was not helping my system at all. And so I did everything from adding progesterone into into my body, thyroid medicine, supplements, detox, all these different things, and nothing was working. In fact, everything was creating just this like ridiculous reaction in my body. And so, like I said, my body really shut down. And so what happened was, the more and more the symptoms showed up, the more and more I kept getting a prescription for something, or kept getting a diagnosis, or kept getting something, a supplement or something. And at some point it got to the point where I was just really frustrated, that in a moment of despair, I actually fired both my doctor and my naturopath. I'm like, that's it. I have got to actually learn how to listen to my body. And so that's what I did. I did that for about a year and a half, because it took that long for my body to re-regulate. So after I got off birth control, and then after I had all this other stuff that was sort of compounded on it to re-regulate my hormones, I found myself actually needing to like say enough for everything, and call off the guards and allow myself a space of just deep healing. And it was probably one of the first times I really got back into my body and really started to understand what my body needed and what it was asking of me. And so it took a full year and a half for my hormones to regulate again. Needless to say, I made a decision after that, as I got into a serious relationship, and I wanted to make sure I was protected, because that's what we need to do. I decided to take to have an IUD embedded in my uterus, so that I would make sure that I wasn't going to be at risk to have kids with where I was at in my career. Had a lot of problems with that. So I had the whole situation with a year and a half trying to re-regulate, then getting the IUD. Trying to get that done was a whole situation in of itself. It actually took 2 attempts, because it just was something my body was not willing to receive. And so I willed my body to take this foreign device that then got embedded into my system for about 10 years. And I had allowed that to go on for a bit longer. And just recently I had that removed. And so I found myself back with my body trying to figure out what the hell just happened to it, and re-regulating itself. And so in that process, I have also started to go through the stages of menopause. And so where I had perimenopausal symptoms early on at around the age of 38, due to the disruptions that were happening in my natural rhythms because of birth control and because of all the supplementation and things that were going on, not to mention some of the things that had directed my rock bottom, which was the ways I was treating my body. I was doing a lot of damage to my body, whether it was fat burners, whether it was inconsistent yo-yo eating, working out too hard, training. There was just a lot of stress on my body. And so all of that had ignited perimenopausal symptoms that I started to go through at 38. And I remember that was the first time I really started to wonder about the effects of what happens for a woman's body. Well, I dismissed it once I kind of got myself regulated. I was more focused on just getting everything out of my system. Let's clean the slate. And then, like I said, I got the IUD and I moved forward. Well, about 5 years ago, I started having symptoms again here and there. And it was maybe not even 5 years ago. It might've been like 3 or 4. It was before the pandemic. And anyway, my mom was staying with me for Christmas. And I remember I was starting to feel like these hot flashes coming on, and I was starting to feel like something wasn't right in my body. And so I was like, maybe I should just research menopause and see what's going on. I know I had some symptoms back when I was 38 that I sort of preemptively caused and ignited due to the things I was doing to my body at the time. But let me see, maybe I'm going through perimenopause. What does that look like? And I have to say, one of the things that really threw me off guard was when I started to do the research. This is the first time I actually leaned in to learn more about menopause as in general. And I'm not kidding you. This is the exact conversation I had with my mom. I come flying out of my bedroom because I just needed a little downtime. I was researching. I was actually getting ready to go to bed. And of course, my little, hamster wheel brain and the rabbit holes that open up for me, once I get an idea, I have to follow it. And so I wasn't going to be able to sleep until I went and figured things out, right? So I went into this little rabbit hole and I started to research all the stuff about perimenopause and menopause and postmenopause and like the whole cycle of it. And I come running out of my bedroom. Again, my mom was staying with me for the holidays at the time. And I was like, what the fuck? She's like, excuse me, what? I said, oh my God. I was like, I was really upset. I was like, what the fuck? What do you mean? And I couldn't even get my words out. I was just so wound up. I was like, what do you mean? How is it possible? Like, what is this bullshit I just saw that says that I effectively can be going through the phases of menopause for a 10-year cycle or more? My mom looked at me, and I'm not kidding. She looked at me and she started laughing, and she's like, what did you think happened when you went through menopause? And I am not kidding. This was exactly what I thought. And this is because we didn't talk about it, right? Nobody talks about it. We didn't talk about it in my workplace. We didn't talk about it with my friends. We didn't talk about it in my family. Nobody talked about it. So how was I supposed to know? And my mom had a hysterectomy and some other things. So her experience through it was very different. So I didn't see or watch her go through a typical, and I'm going to use that word loosely because there's no such thing, a typical pathway around what menopause looked like or how it showed up or the length of it or anything. So I responded to her, I'm like it's something that you go through and it just shows up and it happens and it's like 6 weeks, you're inconvenienced, it's a pain in the ass and it moves on. My mom started laughing hysterically. She's like, yeah, no, I don't think it works that way. And I was like, what the fuck? What do you mean it doesn't work that way? I'm like, what is this? I'm supposed to go through this nonsense for 10 years. And now I'm finding that some women are going through it up to 20 years. When you think about that, that's like 25% of your lifespan or more that we are going through this quote change of life, which, like I said, until I've actually started to go through it, I knew nothing about. And so I was just like, not okay with it. And so I then responded to my mom because, as is me thinking I can control things, especially at that time, I was like, well, I need to see the contract I signed coming into this world. I want my soul contract. I want to see the fine print because I don't have time for this bullshit. And again, she just started laughing. Well, the symptoms sort of, I don't know, they kind of came and went. They weren't anything regular for a while. And then moving into the pandemic, some things changed. And especially over the course of the last probably 8 to 12 months, menopause has completely shown up in its full glory and has taken over my life. And I say that because it has changed everything. And so one of the reasons that I want to bring attention to this is because, one, we're not talking about it. So, I mean, let's get honest. We are not, up until recently, having conversations around the symptoms of menopause, the reality of menopause, the effects of menopause, the impact of menopause. And we've been taught to push it under the rug or suck it up. It's not that big a deal. You're being too emotional. You're being dramatic. I bought into that script. I can remember some women I worked with that were older than me that I was like, whatever, please, you're just being dramatic, right? Because that's literally the story and the narrative that I carried with me, which is utter bullshit. And I'm so glad because recently it's interesting. I just did a couple blog posts and I've got like a 4 or 5 part series that's coming out to talk about this more specifically, to break this down. And in the context of doing that, like I said, I've got some friends that are out there that this is their life's work to have this conversation. And I love that now Oprah is even putting it onto her network where she's inviting these women in to talk about their experiences. Because here's been the biggest thing that I have learned through this process and now having conversations with my girlfriends. And maybe I never noticed it before because, what doesn't affect you, you don't pay attention to, which is a whole different topic of conversation for another podcast, that we tend to have a blind eye to things that don't affect us directly, which means we often don't have empathy or compassion. We are not able to show up in a way to really hold sacred space for other people and support them at the level that they need. And we do it from a place that says, well, it doesn't affect me, so it doesn't really matter, right? It's not real. It doesn't matter. I don't have to have concern about that, or I don't have to be responsible. And I want to really call foul on that for us as a collective whole, that's part of what we have to rewrite and rewire. And so I don't say that just because now that I'm having the effects, I'm like, oh, please, I want some sympathy. And I don't want sympathy around this. I want education and I want a conversation, because what I'm finding, the one absolute that I have found as I am navigating through this menopause journey, amongst other things that I am going through as well, is that menopause shows up differently for every woman. And I'm going to say that again. Menopause shows up differently for every woman. It does not affect any woman in the same way, and every woman's journey is different. Some women, God love them, are so blessed that they're time in menopause is absolutely something that doesn't affect them. It's actually nothing that really phases them. I know a few women like that. I envy them, honestly. It's really something that just doesn't really phase them much at all. Then there's other women, myself included, where it really has taken me out of the game. It has knocked me out in ways that I wasn't even ready or anticipated, and it legitimately has turned my life upside down, inside out, and it's coming from all directions. And so that being said, there's been a lot of challenges inside of that. There's also been a lot of gifts. And so one of the things I just want to talk about today, before I get into some of the other aspects of what's been happening, is the idea that there are a lot of challenges. I had no idea what brain fog was until I was in the throes of menopause. I can be full on in the middle of doing something, like full on in a creative space, like my energy is just so aligned, and then all of a sudden I'll forget what I was doing, what I was thinking, what I was saying. I've even seen it show up in some of my videos or some of my podcasts where I have a full on thought, and then it's like, where the hell did that thought go? It's real. Brain fog really shows up, and it can jack with you. It can pull you out and be like, what the hell was I just, where am I, what was I doing? And it fully gets you like in the space where things are very foggy and very cloudy, and you're just kind of like, okay, wait till this passes, because I don't even know what I was about to do, right? And so that brain fog has been really real for me. The other thing that I've had a lot of challenges with is hot flashes and night sweats, particularly night sweats. I tend to get I run cold all the time. It's a running joke. I mean, I'm sitting here layered up. I'm in Austin right now. It's a cold day. But I tend to run really cold. So I'm always freezing. I've got blankets and sweaters and things on. And then in the moments where I don't, I am completely melting. And what's interesting is night sweats are really interesting. It's as if your entire body from the inside out is on fire and that your skin is melting. At least that's been my experience. And I mean, it literally can last for several minutes or it can last for several seconds. And I have found that when it shows up, no matter what I'm doing, I have to stop and I need to just let it pass. I have been in a full on training or presentation where I've even had to tell them, I'm like, okay, y'all need to wait a minute. I'm having a hot flash. Like I've literally just had to stand there and wait for it to pass because it's so intense. Sometimes it's actually made it where I've almost gotten woozy and it's almost wanted to make me pass out. But it just gets to a point where your skin gets so clammy, it feels like it's melting off of you and you need to wait because you can't do anything. It's just, you're gross. And then it passes. And oftentimes after it passes, I'm freezing, like really cold again. So that's been fantastic and fun to deal with on occasion. And it's not regular. Like there's some nights I sleep really well, and there's other nights that I have ongoing, consistent night sweats and hot flashes that are uncontrollable. Now, one of the things I've noticed, because I've really dialed into my nutrition, what my body is responding to, I have done a lot of, and I'm going to talk some about some life hacks and some other things that I've learned that work for me on another episode. But I've really dialed into intermittent fasting, ketobiotic diet, looking at, when to eat protein and when to eat more grounded root vegetables. When to work out hard and when not to. And again, really understanding and trying to align back to my cycle while going back to getting that IUD that actually had become embedded in my uterus taken out. It has taken me a couple months to re-regulate and get my body back to a place where I can actually listen to it again. So once again, that space of birth control or IUDs or these hormonal shifts that we are bringing into our body that are taking us out of our natural rhythm, our natural cycle, for me, that's been really challenging. And so I'm even going to talk about HRT at some point. Because for me, that's not an option. I am not at a point where I want to put any more hormones into my body because of the damage and the tailspin that it has created for me that just has not allowed me to be at my best and highest level. So with that, there are things that I have been really diligent, which is monitoring what foods seem to cause hot flashes or triggers for me, where when the brain fog comes in. So I've been trying to track things so that I can have a better understanding of where my body's at. And it's one of the things that I would, if I were to suggest anything to any woman, is to get more in tune with your own cycle and more in tune with when and where your triggers show up. I would also say if you're someone, whether you're another female or a male, supporting a woman in your life that's going through, whether it's perimenopause, which is all over the place, menopause, which tends to, at least for me, feels like it's moving at least in a little bit more consistent way, or postmenopause, how can you recognize when some of those things are showing up as well and help support them, right? And so really some interesting things that have been coming up. The other thing for me is there's been this restlessness. Sometimes, especially when I'm sleeping, I cannot get comfortable. Like I have incredible pain sometimes in my body, which apparently is a whole nother symptom of menopause. There's this thing called frozen shoulder. I will say my right shoulder at times, sometimes I can only lift it a certain level, and it has nothing to do with lifting. Although that has probably been the most eye-opening and most frustrating aspect of trying to figure out my path through menopause is the fact that it has completely created an upheaval in the way that I train and the way that I work out. Working out is my sanctuary. It's my sanity. It's the space for me that really lights me up. It gives me mental fortitude. It allows me to connect spiritually. It is really, I mean, even looking at my human design, which I've talked about many times, I have lines for where my vitality is really key in how I connect, in how I lead, and how I'm bringing abundance to me. And so working out has always been my jam. I'm one of those people that actually loves to work out and sweat. I love to lift heavy. I love, and I have done over the last 3.5 years, Camp Gladiator, which has been, this very intense boot camp HIIT style training that resembles, some things with CrossFit and some other stuff. I haven't been able to do that. I have been either in tremendous amount of pain afterwards in my body, or I find that where I was able to lift, 20, 25-pound dumbbells for my training, sometimes I can barely lift my 15s. And so it's been really unnerving to sit with all of the changes that keep showing up. And the other thing that has shown up for me, and I guess is also a potential risk for any woman going through menopause in general, but for me in particular, as someone who was diagnosed with scoliosis when I was 12 years old, which is a natural curvature of your spine. And I have known over the last couple of years that my curve has progressed. I mean, you can even see when I'm sitting, one of my shoulders is higher. I have a full 1/2 inch difference between one leg and the other because of the way my curvature is in my bones. And I'm at probably, last time I was measured, I was about a 32 degree curvature, where earlier on I was in my 20s. And I did strength training actually used to help me manage my scoliosis. It allowed me to create the strength so that I didn't have the pain in my back. And just recently, I've noticed that my scoliosis is also showing signs and symptoms. And so right now with menopause can trigger scoliosis later on in women, because it's oftentimes associated with osteoporosis and, just your bones, you're shrinking your bones, those that are happening. But for me, who's had what's known as idiopathic scoliosis, which means we have no idea where the cause of the cure is. No one else in my family, well, there may have been, no one was diagnosed before I was. I actually got to tell you, I forgot I had scoliosis at times because it hasn't been something that has affected me. Now that is an entirely different story. And so that is another level of what I've been managing as I've been going through this menopause journey. And so I say that because if you're a woman who has other things that are going on in your body, know that menopause can exacerbate or amplify some of the symptoms of those conditions. It can affect autoimmune diseases. It can affect your adrenals. It can affect your nervous system. It can affect your bone density, it basically can affect everything. And so that, when I think about the fact that I didn't know the longevity of the cycle of what menopause could really look like for women. 2, I didn't recognize what the actual symptoms and or effects could be of menopause. And then really looking at what is the impact of that overall. really made me start to realize that we have a lot of opportunity to educate more around this topic. I think about all of the light that's been shined on women's health over the past, couple years, especially with the reversal of Roe versus Wade, and don't get me started on that topic. But this idea around managing women's health, and from everything that I've seen, is we have very, very, very little education around what is really needed for women's health. And I think that it is in our opportunity to, one, educate ourselves, two, to lean into the difficult and uncomfortable conversations, three, create safer spaces to support and lift up other women and recognize that one woman's symptoms may not look like another's. And then the last piece is really around taking responsibility for our part, to make sure that we are using our voice and flexing that muscle. And so one of the things that I would like to see more of is leaders leaning into this conversation and knowing that this affects your workplace. It affects the quality of your work. It affects how you work. It affects your interactions with other people. It affects your relationships. And we need to have more compassion and sympathy, more compassion and empathy for what is required, because there have been days that literally it took everything just for me to get out of bed and like do the bare basics. It doesn't happen often, but I've had those days. And we need to know that if our bodies are demanding that we rest, we're in part of our cycle that says you've got to rest right now. We need to stop making that something that we're shaming, we're judging, we're shushing, we're putting a stigma around. We have a responsibility of leaders to engage in this conversation. And I'm going to start sharing some resources with people that really, like I said, this is their life work. One of the people that I really respect in this space is Dr. Mindy Peltz. She is an advocate for women's health in general, particularly for women over 40 who are experiencing perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause. And she talks about how we fuel our bodies based on our cycles. And she does a lot around fasting and fasting for women, because most of the research and most of the information that's out there is around just fasting in general, and it's designed for fasting for men. And so she has a great book out there that I highly recommend. I'm going to be sharing more about, called Fast Like a Girl. And she's all over YouTube. She's fantastic. She's always pouring out this free content that is how you can better understand how to nourish, how to fuel, how to feed your body, and when to work out, what you should be eating based on your natural rhythms and cycles. And so really, really powerful stuff. I think the conversation that Oprah is opening up right now with Drew Barrymore and Maria Shriver and several doctors that she's bringing to the table, I think is worth listening to. I also have a dear friend, Pat Duckworth, who is also, this is her life's work. This is the conversation that she's engaging with, especially in the workplace, around how do we support women as they're going through these various phases, because they need different things at different junctures through this journey. And we have got to understand that it is not something that they're making up. It's not a bullshit story. It's not them being dramatic. It is real. And we need to start treating it as in the reality of what it really is. And so that's what I wanted to start this conversation with today. Like I said, I'm going to lean in and share some more things around my findings and what has been working for me. But again, I want you to know, and I cannot stress, this is an individual journey. It's an individual journey that we can have a collective conversation. And it's an individual journey that we need to recognize that every woman is going to have a different path in terms of how she's navigating that mighty M word, which is that ultimate space of menopause. So thank you for sticking with me today. Thank you for being tuned in. Stay tuned, because both in my blog and on this show, we're going to be having some more conversations, because like I said, this is a space to get raw, real, and gritty. And we need to bring the topics to the table that usually are the things we're trying to push under the table. So with that, today, the conversation was about the mighty M, all about menopause, and stay tuned, because there's more to it.